Hello again, and welcome to day one of our Joyful Trees sew along. So today we are going to talk about cutting our fabric, and I will include all of the tips that I know to help you along the way. Here is what's on the agenda today. We will cut all of our fabrics for either a large or a small wall hanging, depending on what you're doing. And I will also share some of my tips of how I cut my fabric accurately. We will also talk about the directional fabric, if you happen to use any directional fabric, how to cut it in order to have the placement correct, and how to piece it as well. We will learn the basic process of making the three-dimensional flying geese blocks, and those would be used in the small wall hanging. But we will also learn how to construct these overlapping 3D flying geese blocks that are in the large wall hanging. And with all of our flying geese done, we will be ready then for day two of constructing our star block, our tree trunks, and adding our borders. All right, let's get started. Okay, here we are with my fabric choices for this sew along. So for the large wall hanging that has 3 trees, I picked all the wildflower wovens from our gallery fabric. It will be a dark background with these 3 colors for the tree, and then this will be my star and my tree trunks. And most likely I will then decide on my white border to be the same color as the background, with probably one of these colors as my narrow accent border. For the small tree wall hanging, I chose the Advent Tail collection from Caterina Rocella, also from Art Gallery Fabric, with this beautiful shimmery gold background. And we will have a golden tree this time with this beautiful reindeer and red star and a little blue-gray trunk for the trees. Again, I am going to probably decide on my white border and accent border later, but for now, these are our fabrics for cutting. Let's just start now with cutting, and I will show you all of my tips and tricks how I cut my fabric. All right, first we will cut my rectangles for the trees for the small tree wall hanging. In other words, we are going to cut these rectangles for the flying geese. And if you remember in my introduction video, I did tell you if you're using directional fabric and you care how they are placed in your quilt, you have to pay attention how you cut your fabric. So in this case, this fabric is directional in a way that all the deer are in one direction, and I do want them to show up this way in my triangles of flying geese, which means that when I go to cut this fabric, I will cut my rectangles this way, 12.5 by 6.5 rectangles, and as opposed to cutting them this way, because I would want my reindeer to be in the correct direction. Now, here is one thing that I wanted to show you as my tip of cutting fabric. I always cut my fabric double folded. The reasons for that is that it's just easier. The road that I have to go, let's put it that way, is shorter, right? Rather than, so if I'm cutting this way, this is only about 10-11 inches, versus me cutting it this way, I would have to use a long ruler, go all the way, and typically when you cut this long way, you lose a little bit of pressure of your hand and a rotary cutter going all the way there, and it could cause some mistakes. So what I do is I cut my fabric double folded. And yes, that is risky in a sense that if you cut your fabric double folded, you can end up with the strips that are sort of in a W shape. And to prevent that, what's really important is first that you fold your fabric correctly. Step one is I make sure that my selvages are on top of each other and parallel, just like this. And then when I fold my fabric, I make sure that my selvage is absolutely parallel to that original fold of the fabric. So this is how it goes. Now, One important thing to do here also is to square up your cut edge of the fabric. What that means is that what I want is that this double fold, that I always put this double fold closer to me just because it's easier to see it. It's one line when you are aligning with your ruler. And so what I want to make sure is that this double fold of my fabric is exactly 90 degrees to the cut edge of my fabric. So what I do initially is I would place my ruler and align the horizontal line of the ruler. Any one of the lines would be okay. I'm going to zoom in just to show you a little closer. So this line right here, I'm aligning precisely with my double fold. And then I'm making sure that I'm catching all 4 layers. You can push it as close to the edges as you possibly can. Sometimes these layers will be uneven, which is why we have to straighten it out and square it up. So right now I'm catching all of my layers and I am holding my ruler. Another tip for especially for beginners is you don't want to hold your ruler like this because it is more prone to slippering. What you want to do is hold your ruler with all of your 5 fingers. And if you're using a narrow ruler like this, you can also put your pinky on the outside of the ruler to prevent it from shifting. So now you're holding your ruler, you are putting your rotary cutter down and cutting that to even out your edges. Now your cut edge of the fabric is absolutely 90 degrees to your ruler, and when you go to cut your strip or whatever you may need, it will be straight. In our case, we need to cut 6.5 by 12.5 rectangles. So what I'm going to do here is basically I didn't have to move my ruler because this ruler is exactly 6.5 inches. So I'm going to put it back to the edge. That's 6.5, and then I am going to cut that 6.5 inch strip right there. And before you move your hand, what you want to do, make sure is that you cut it completely, because if you didn't, you can just go again without having to reposition the ruler. So that's basically how I like to cut my fabric. And then from a strip that I cut, I am going to now open that strip or not, depending on what I'm cutting. And now at this point, I am going to get rid of my selvages. And again, I want to, at any point, I want to make sure that my cutting is square. So every time you're cutting, you're always going to align your horizontal line of the ruler with the edge of your fabric, because that will ensure that your cut is exactly 90 degrees or square, right? So right now, I'm just going to get rid of my selvages here, like this. What I need is 6.5 by 12.5 rectangles. And again, this ruler happens to be 12.5 inches. So basically all I'm doing here is going like this and then cutting my rectangle. And that's 2 of them because we cut double fabric. And then we are going to open up this one and cut 1 more that we can get from the width of the strip. Now, I could have done this because I would need 5 total. I could have cut 2 strips and then put them on top of each other. But just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just showing you how I cut my... So now I have perfectly precise rectangles that are 12.5 by 6.5. And, you know, cutting by using my fabric that is double folded. I hope this will help you with a few tips on how to cut your fabric, and I'm going to continue cutting all of my pieces for the small joyful tree wall hanging. Here are my cut pieces. In this case, these are the squares and rectangles for the flying geese for the small joyful tree, and these are the squares and the 3 colors of rectangles for the flying geese of the larger joyful tree wall quilt. Right now, I am going to show you on the example of the smaller one how we make so-called sandwiches that will be our three-dimensional flying geese. I'm going to move this. We are going to need some pins. The first thing we will do is take one of our rectangles and fold it wrong sides together, carefully matching all the raw edges. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Here we go. So we are folding our rectangle, carefully matching all the raw edges here and here. And this fold, you can just kind of crease with your fingers. It doesn't have to be sharp crease or anything done with the iron, but just crease it with your fingers like this. Now for making a sandwich, so-called sandwich, we are going to take two of our background squares. So remember I mentioned directional fabric. In my case here, this fabric is not directional, so we don't have to worry about how these squares are oriented. However, this fabric is directional, so I will show you what that means. So we are going to take one of the squares, put it right side up. Then we are going to take our folded rectangle and place it on top of the square, matching sides and the bottom raw edge. What you will notice here, and I'm going to lift it up just to see that the fold of the rectangle does not align with the edge, top edge of your square, and that is exactly how it should be. So we have raw edges matched here. The fold is 1/4 inch below the edge of the rectangle. Now we are taking our second rectangle. So in the terms of direction, these are this way, and when I go to put my square, I'm going to put the second square on top of the rectangle, matching all four, right side down, obviously, matching all four raw edges here of the bottom square, right? So now we have this little sandwich. We have the fold that is not quite matching, and that's how it should be. And we have the squares all matched up. Now we are going to stitch 1/4 inch seam allowance on this side of this sandwich. For me, in order to kind of remember as I take them to my sewing machine, as I pin this to secure, I will actually put my pins so that they are pointing to the seam I am doing. Now, if our fabric wasn't directional, you could have done this or this side. It wouldn't matter, but it's always keeping your fold on the top as you're going to your sewing machine. But because this fabric is directional, we want, I'm going to show you, we want top of your fabric, whatever that motif is, the top of it should be at the seam of that you are going to make. So that is why I am going to do this seam. And now we are going to take this to the sewing machine and stitch 1/4 inch along this side. So here we are with us at the sewing machine. Remember, as we made our sandwich, we are going to keep that fold of your rectangle on the top as you're going into your sewing machine, and stitch 1/4 inch seam allowance only on this one side. Again, because my fabric is directional, it is the side that has top of my fabric motifs. In this case, these are these little heads of the reindeer. They are towards my seam. If the fabric is not directional, it could have been this one or this one. It doesn't matter. But in this case, I put my pins pointing to the seam that I want to do. So I am just going to do a 1/4 inch seam. And here we are. So as I take my pins out, we did our 1/4 inch seam here, and this is what we have. And the next thing I will show you is how to open this up and press. I am just going to, in the meantime, do all the rest of my flying geese here, apparently. And I want to show you one more thing. These were all five flying geese blocks for the small wall hanging. If you're making the large wall hanging, remember we had 3 colors of the tree. So, and there are different amounts of flying geese blocks. For the tallest tree, we need 5 flying geese blocks, and these are my sandwiches for the tallest tree. Now, because of the overlapping flying geese, there is a little bit of a difference how you're going to make them. For the very top of your flying geese blocks, for the tallest trees. Oops, I forgot. All right. Now, if you're making the larger wall hanging, like shown here, you have 3 different color of your flying geese blocks, 3 different trees. And I'm going to show you one small alteration of how we make the flying geese blocks for the tallest tree right here, the one in the middle, because we have 5 flying geese blocks for the tallest, 4 for the middle, and 3 for the shortest. In the case of the top flying geese, you would make it just the same as I just showed you for any flying geese by stitching the entire length of the seam allowance. However, for the other 4, because they are overlapping with others, there is one difference in how to make them. And that difference is going to be that when you go to stitch that seam that you have, so here is my sandwich. Again, fold is on the top right here, and it's pinned. Pins are showing me the seams that I'm going to do. However, in order to be able to overlap those flying geese, when I make this seam, I am going to stop about 1 inch before the end. So I am going to put it in my sewing machine and do my regular 1/4 inch. And then stop about 1 inch before the end. So this is how this is going to look like. So I did not finish my seam here, and that is because we will need to tuck in the ends of the other 2 flying geese that are overlapping, and we will see that in the next video. Once you stitched your 1/4 inch seam on one side, you will come to the ironing board, and here's how we are going to press and open our flying geese. First, we set the seam. We're going to open this square all the way and press this to the side, because it really, because of the fold, this would really be difficult to press open, although you probably can try if you really love pressing seams open, but it's easiest to press to the side. And now we are going to open our folded rectangle into a triangle, basically forming our flying geese. Now that crease that you made with your fingers, or you can also do it with an iron, is now going to help you, because that crease needs to align right on top of this seam, and that's how you will know that your triangle is open correctly. Now you are going to also fold this until your raw edges of your flying geese triangle match the raw edges of the square, and once they are nicely aligned, then you know that you opened it in a correct position, and you are going to take an iron and press this nice and firm, and do the same thing on the other side. You see that they aligned here, so now you can just continue and press this flying geese, and voila, you made a 3-dimensional flying geese. You will notice though, the wings, let's call them, are loose, and they will be caught in your next 1/4 inch seam as you're joining your geese together. But if you just want to make sure that they're not flapping around, and they are, you can always just pin them, temporarily. You can also, in some instances, depending on what you're doing, run a basting stitch that will be about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And for the, if that's easier for you, you can do it. For the single tree, the small wall hanging, you can do that. However, for the large tree, I will show you, we don't want to do that at the moment. So for the large tree, remember I said the very top, the middle tree that has 5 flying geese blocks, the very top one is the same. We stitched our seam allowance all the way to the end, and we are going to open it just the same as we did with previously, and open our flying geese right here and align and press this. But what I want to show you is for the rest of the 4 flying geese in the middle tree. Remember, we did partial seam, we only stopped here. We will still open our flying geese the same way. You will set the seam, you will press this to the side and try to press this the best you can, even though it's not secured, and open your flying geese. And specifically for this middle tree in the large wall hanging, you don't want, as you press your triangles in place, what you don't want is to baste them with the stitching. You can temporarily pin them, but you don't want to baste them, because we will need, as we make our overlapping flying geese, we will need to lift this up in order to tuck our other flying geese in here. That's why you don't want to baste this. You can temporarily pin it just like we did before, here and here, but you don't want to baste it. All right. Okay, so using the technique I just showed you, if you're making a small wall hanging, the one that has 5 flying geese blocks, you made all of your 5 flying geese blocks, and they're now ready to be assembled into a tree. But what I really want to show you here is, if you are making the large wall hanging, here we have a slightly different situation where we will have these overlapping flying geese, and there is just a slight difference in how we assemble that. What you will notice is that first you want to make the middle tree that has 5 flying geese blocks, and the top one is made just as any one of these. And that top one, if you remember, we stitched it completely in our seam, and here it is. So all we will do right now is join 2 6.5-inch squares on either side to form that top row of our large wall hanging. Now for the next row, you will see that we have a second flying geese of the middle tree, and then we have the top flying geese of this medium size tree. So for that, here is what we want to do. If you remember, these are the ones that we didn't stitch the seam all the way to the end, and there is a reason for that. So that one, we will, on one side, on the left side, we will just join a square just like we did with the top, but with the right side here, we will do something different, and that is we will take the rectangle of our, medium-sized tree, the rectangle color, and fold it right sides together as we did before and now what we want to do here is kind of remove this. This is why we couldn't stitch this. We want to remove this wing away and then make a sandwich using this existing square that we already stitched in. So we are going to put our folded rectangle with the fold on the top, again matching the bottom and the right side raw edges, and again here we will have the fold not quite matching the top side of the square, which is how it's supposed to be. And then we are going to take another square, put it right side down, and match the bottom, right, and top raw edges here. And we are going to pin this, and again, like said before, I typically like to use my pins so they're pointing to the seams that I am making. So I'm just going to pin this one here and one at the bottom, just because these are fairly large. Now what we're going to do here is just, again, remember the fold on the top. We are going to stitch this side with a 1/4 inch seam allowance to form that side, that overlapping flying geese. If you are making the third row here, which has 2 overlapping flying geese, then you would go on this side, take your short 3 color of the rectangle, which in my case is this light green. Again, fold right sides together. Sorry, wrong sides together, not right sides. Again, we are going to now on this side match the bottom and the left raw edges here, and then take another of our squares, put it right side down and match bottom, left and top edges, pin here again, and then go to the sewing machine, and we can stitch both this side and this side to form one of these rows that has 2 overlapping flying geese. So here we have this fairly unusual setup for the 3-dimensional flying geese. If you are making a large wall hanging and you want to create these rows that have 3 overlapping flying geese blocks, we folded them and pinned them and then stitched them just like I showed you. So now it's the time to open this up. So here is my right flying geese block stitched, and then here is my left one stitched. So what I want to do, and remember this was the middle one that we didn't want to sew. Now we're basically doing exactly the same thing, it's just a little bit more crowded. We are going to open up this square first, set up this seam, open up this square and press it to the side, and then open up this flying geese just like we did before. We just have these extras hanging on the side. Again, you want to match the crease with the seam right here and make sure that your raw edges of the flying geese and the squares are matching. And once they are nicely matched, you are going to press that and then do the same on this side. Here we want to not catch this other flying geese, but just press this as far as you possibly can, like this. Now here is why we left that seam. Remember, we need to tuck in this corner of the flying geese into this seam, and then we can finish it. Now we're going to turn this the other way, the middle one, and work on the left flying geese. Same thing, set the seam, open the square, press it to the side like this, and now we're going to open this flying geese, match our crease to the middle seam, make sure that our raw edges align here, just like this, and here too. Make sure that your corner is fully open, and now we can press this one right here, nice and steady. So all we have, so here we are. Once we press this, we have 3 overlapping flying geese blocks right here. Now I know that in my pattern, the middle 3, the tallest tree, is kind of up front and the other 2 are behind, but nobody says that you can't overlap them a different way. You can tuck this one in here. Then of course in this case you needed to left this seam open rather than the middle seam, but those are just creative possibilities that you can do. I'm going to leave mine as it is. So now what we need to do is I'm going to show you how we are going to tuck this one in and finish the seam right at the sewing machine. Here is our row of overlapped flying geese, and what we need to do is tuck this corner into the seam and this corner into the seam. So what I like to do for this, the first thing is I like to take this middle flying geese, lift up this top part and just kind of unfold it, just so that when you're finishing this seam, if you leave it like this, you may catch this middle top part into the seam, and that's not what you want. So that's why I lift it up like this and just kind of unfold it temporarily. And now what you want to do is just fold this back, make sure that your little triangle is getting into the seam, and then do the same thing for the other flying geese. So here is my little triangle of the left flying geese, and here is my little triangle of the right flying geese, and I just want to make sure that they're all being caught into this 1/4 inch seam, and now go and finish that. All right, so here we go. Now we finish that seam, and as you open this flying geese, you will see that your corner is tucked in and secured. We can put this one back, and of course this one is tucked in and secured. And now you are ready to go and assemble the rows into your large wall hanging. At this point, you may want to pin these in place, let's say like this, and same thing with this end here, right here, and the other end as well. Or you can now run a basting stitch all the way down at the bottom if you prefer that. I typically just pin them. You can also use your little Elmer glue stick if you want, but right now this this row of overlapping flying geese is ready to be assembled with the rest of them. Okay, here we are at the end of day 1. We constructed all of our flying geese blocks, either for the small wall hanging or for the larger wall hanging. And I hope that all these videos and tips were useful to you. Of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me at any point. And so then we will continue tomorrow on day 2, making our star for the treetop, making our tree trunks, and attaching borders to our wall hangings. Bye for now.